Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The ex-president of the United States, Donald Trump, created such an acute security threat to his own Vice President Mike Pence in pursuit of his attempted coup that Pence's chief of staff warned the Secret Service on January 5th that he thought the VP would be in danger the next day. This newest reporting comes from the New York Times. It breaks just days before the bipartisan committee investigating the six is set to begin its public hearings, with even more revelations sure to come. Now, we have known for a long time, in the days before January 6th, there was a target on Mike Pence. He was under enormous pressure from Trump and his allies to go along with the coup by essentially throwing out electors from states that voted for President Joe Biden and handing victory to Trump instead. We know Pence tried to get to yes, calling allies and advisors, including former Vice President Dan Quayle, to see if he could find a way to justify overturning the results of a free and fair election before ultimately determining that he could not. But that did not stop Trump and his fellow coup plotters, who knew that Pence was unwilling to cooperate, from turning the screws.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
That's the message that the crowd gathered at the Ellipse heard right before Trump whipped them up to a frenzy and then sent them, instructed them, invited them to march towards the Capitol, where, of course, thousands of them broke into the building, assaulting police officers and chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." They even erected a gallows with a noose outside the building. Naturally, the Secret Service took the angry mob, some of them chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," pretty seriously. The Secret Service came to retrieve Pence from the Senate chamber, where he was presiding over the joint session to ratify Biden's victory, where he was doing the thing that Donald Trump didn't want him to do, that the crowd didn't want him to do. And we know some of what happened next, thanks to reporting from Washington Post journalists Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig. Quote, the lead special agent in charge of the vice president's protective detail twice asked Pence to evacuate the Capitol, but Pence refused, saying, "I'm not leaving the Capitol." The third time, it was more of an order than a request. Pence's detail guided them down to a staircase, to a secure subterranean area that rioters couldn't reach, where the vice president's armored limousine awaited. So Pence is now somewhere beneath the Capitol, with Secret Service agents urging him to get in his limo and flee the scene. Now, just listen to Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, who sits on this bipartisan committee, which has been investigating the insurrection for nearly a year now, describe what happened next.
So when his Secret Service agents, including one of them who was carrying the nuclear football with him, were chased out by these neo-fascists, and they ran down to some still undisclosed mysterious place in the Capitol, he uttered what I think are the six most chilling words of this entire thing I've seen so far. He said, "I'm not getting in that car."
I'm not getting in that car. It's the moment of truth. Remember, Pence is under tremendous pressure to go along with the coup. He's decided that he won't go along with the coup, and he knows the president hates him because of it. An insurrectionist mob just broke into the building with the stated intention of publicly executing him. The Secret Service is demanding that they usher him to safety, and Pence refuses to get in the car. Now, up until today, here is where there has been some ambiguity, because there are basically two ways to read what happened here. The first is that Pence simply did not want to show weakness in the face of the mob. He didn't want the image of what that would mean. This is the argument his chief of staff, Mark Short, outlined last year.
He said, "I'm not leaving." And the reason he said he's not leaving is because he said he did not want our adversaries across the globe to see a 15-car motorcade fleeing the Capitol. I think he exerted enormous leadership under enormous pressure. And I think he, again, despite efforts to have him evacuate, he's like, I don't want that visual for the world to see. I'm going to stay here.
Now, there's likely some truth to that idea, but new evidence points to Pence's motivations being a little more complicated than that. There is ample reason to believe that Trump wanted Pence out of the picture so that the coup could go on without him, because he knew that Pence wouldn't play ball. But remember, we've just learned this in the last few days, because according to a newly uncovered memo written by a Trump lawyer and sent to Rudy Giuliani, one that a judge found to not be covered by the crime fraud exception and privilege, meaning that it was evidence of possibly a crime, that in this memo, right, they spell out a possibility of basically just going around Pence. If Pence would somehow just recuse himself from election certification, if Pence says, okay, fine, I won't do it, but I'll step back, well, then a Trump ally who was willing to go along with the coup could take his place. Again, quoting from the memo, Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley or another senior Republican majority member would become the presiding officer of the joint session and begin the election certification. And from there, it would be just a matter of following the instructions in Trump lawyer John Eastman's coup memo and hand the victory to Trump. So again, this is key. Think about this. We know there was a plan in place to do the coup without Pence, right? If you get rid of Pence and someone else is presiding, because it's the presiding person that's the fulcrum. Now, we also know that people in Pence's inner circle were extremely suspicious of what lengths Trump would go to get Pence out of the way. And I mean like physically out of the way. Rucker and Lenig reported one exchange between a guy named Anthony Ornato, a Trump loyalist and senior Secret Service agent, and a Pence advisor named Keith Kellogg. Quote, Ornato, who oversaw Secret Service movements, told Kellogg that Pence's detail was planning to move the vice president to Joint Base Andrews. Again, this is on January 6th, okay? Kellogg replied, you can't do that, Tony. Leave him where he's at. He's got a job to do. I know you guys too well. You'll fly him to Alaska if you have a chance. Don't do it. Again, when I first encountered that bit of reporting, I didn't quite get what he was alluding to. Like, you'll fly him to Alaska. Right? If Pence isn't there, someone else can preside. If someone else can preside, someone else can do the coup, as the memo spells out. So one of Pence's advisors reportedly thought the Secret Service, under the guidance of Trump loyalists, was hatching a plot to physically get Pence out of the picture so the coup could go on without him. And this appears to be the theory that Congressman Raskin has endorsed.
The Secret Service agents, who presumably are reporting to Trump's Secret Service agents, were trying to spirit him off of the campus. And he said, I'm not getting in that car until we count the Electoral College votes. He knew exactly what this inside coup they had planned for was going to do. This was not a coup directed at the president. It was a coup directed by the president against the vice president and against the Congress.
And then just today, we got a new piece of evidence. And that must have been weighing pretty heavily on Pence's mind, right? So as Maggie Haberman reports in the New York Times, on January 5th, one day before all this goes down, Mark Short, Vice President's Chief of Staff, called Pence's lead Secret Service agent to his West Wing office. Come here, I have to talk to you about something. And the Chief of Staff had a message for the agent. The president, Trump, was going to turn publicly against the vice president, and there could be a security risk to Pence because of it. Just take a second to digest this. We've gotten sort of used to a lot of this, but, right? The vice president's chief of staff on January 5th, the day before January 6th, thought the vice president was going to be put in physical danger because of the president, because the president would go after him publicly in a way that would target and incite violence towards him. And guess what? Pretty good prediction. Right? Pretty prescient warning. Entirely valid. In fact, we now know, also from reporting the Times, that while the angry mob was storming the Capitol, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," Trump was, at the very least, open to the idea. Quote, Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows told colleagues that Trump had said something to the effect of, maybe Pence should be hanged. So in that moment, in the undisclosed location beneath the Capitol, Pence had every reason to be worried about his image, worried about the attempted coup, and we now know worried for his life. He knew the president was going to abandon him, but more than that, turn against him. and that the president's supporters might turn violent, in fact, had turned violent. His worst nightmare was coming true. Trump was pursuing any strategy possible to hold on to power by any means necessary. And at that point, because Pence would not play ball, he was an obstacle. Anything that would remove him from physically being able to dispatch his duties would be to Trump's benefit to further the plot, whether that meant Pence was shipped to Alaska or the crowd just got their hands on him.